Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
More than 3 decades ago, Natarajan Viswanathan was a student in India, hoping to get a graduate degree in mechanical engineering in the United States.
I applied to a bunch of schools in the US for my graduate studies from India. And I got admission into one of the Californian schools, actually. It was Stanford University.
Natarajan got what seemed like the opportunity of a lifetime. But then came the price tag.
For graduate studies, they said all told it will come to $52,000. And at that time, it was more than our house itself. So even if my father sold off the house and was prepared to live in the streets, it would not be possible for me to attend.
His family couldn't foot the bill, so Natarajan chose a more affordable path. He got his master's from the University of Maryland and later an MBA from the University of Michigan, 2 state schools. And for the last 33 years, Natarajan has lived in the U.S. He and his wife raised their family in the suburbs north of Los Angeles. Today, he says, their after-tax take-home pay is about $185,000. When it came time for their 2 sons to go to college, they wanted to be able to provide them every opportunity. But they'd also decided early on they didn't want their sons to go into debt to pay for college.
For graduate studies, I can understand taking out a loan, but for undergrad, I want them to graduate loan-free.
But both boys had a prestigious and expensive private school high on their lists, the University of Southern California.
We kept an open mind, saying if you get in, then we will consider definitely. But because it is a private school, how are we going to pay for it was the question, which was always lurking in the back of our minds.
Their older son wasn't accepted to USC. He ended up going to UCLA. Last year, their younger son, Ayush, got some news.
So he called us on the phone and he was all excited and he said, I'm in. Of course, there was a packet which arrived in mail after that. I still have the letter.
That acceptance letter also contained other information that Natarajan says dampened their excitement pretty quickly.
When we saw that the estimated tuition plus living expenses came to around $97,000 per year, then we knew that it was not something that we could accomplish on our own. So it would be more than roughly around 55% of the take-home pay.
The school did offer Ayush some financial aid, $5,000 a year.
But $92,000 to $97,000, I didn't see much of a difference.
The family appealed, explaining that their older son was in medical school, and between his living expenses and what USC was going to charge for Ayush to go there, the family would end up spending 70% of their take-home pay on the boy's education. But no luck.
We had probably around 5-10 minutes of conversation at best.
So Natarajan and his wife began running the numbers to see whether they could pay for USC. Ayush's college savings account certainly wasn't going to cover it. Natarajan took out a loan on his 401k, but that still wasn't going to be enough. They wondered what more they could do. Could they sell their home, maybe move to a less expensive state? And as the cost of college rises, middle-class families all over the U.S. are asking these kinds of questions. I'm David Gura, and this is The Big Take from Bloomberg News. Today on the show, an exclusive Bloomberg analysis of the real cost of attending the most selective colleges and universities in the U.S. and why staying in-state might not be the most affordable option. Bloomberg's Paulina Cachero and Francesca Maglione have been looking at the rising cost of higher education in the U.S. and what it means for students and their families. Francesca says colleges and universities typically announce what they call their sticker price around this time every year.
What they look at is their tuition costs and additional fees like books, room and board, and things like that. And so they call that the cost of attendance or the sticker price. That number nowadays is $95,000 for some colleges, $100,000 for others. That price kind of scares a lot of people when they see it, and colleges are always adamant about telling people that with financial aid, most people don't actually pay that.
What percentage of students end up paying that full sticker price?
In reality, half of students pay that price. That's still a lot of people when you're talking about $95,000 at some of these schools.
When you look at that sticker price, how do these colleges and universities justify the cost being as high as it is?
Colleges will say inflation has made the cost go up for sure. COVID wasn't easy for these colleges as well. And they'll say that that's what it takes to educate their students. The way they justify the price is through financial aid. That's how they say we have these wealthy students that can then help us educate these less wealthy students. But they're reaching kind of a breaking point where even the students that are considered wealthy in the college's eyes don't feel like they can actually afford to pay that big sticker price.
I also asked Paulina how colleges and universities determine how much financial aid to offer.
So when students are applying for financial aid, everyone uses the application for federal aid called FAFSA.
I remember that.
Yes. Yeah. So basically what happens is families put in information about their finances, how much money their parents make. Are they from a home with parents that are together or divorced? Your home equity, any investments that you might have, to try and create a picture of what this family's income looks like. And then the FAFSA spits out, a score called the Student Aid Index and gives that to schools. However, different schools have their own financial aid offices that calculate how they distribute aid in very different ways. And beyond, the different forms, each school has their own formula for determining what family gets how much aid.
There are all sorts of tools that help students and families figure out how much college will cost. Paulina and Francesca took two of them, a calculator called My Intuition and another called Meadow, and used them to show how financial aid gets distributed.
Readers can go to our story and you can select your income. We have 8 income profiles ranging from $75,000 to $400,000 and see the colleges stacked up against each other and how much you would pay after financial aid and get a range. As
you look at it more holistically, sort of who's benefiting from financial aid or getting most of it, and what's the point at which it begins to kind of diminish or go to zero?
Basically, when you make $75,000 household income, you pay around 10% of your income towards college costs. But then once you hit $150,000, you start paying 20% of your total income. And families making anywhere from $200,000 to $400,000 are expected to pay the same financial burden. So that's like 20% across the board.
I ask this selfishly as a New Yorker in a city that's very expensive to live in. Is that something that they take into account, sort of what the cost of living is like in a particular geography?
So actually, most schools don't.
They don't.
Make regional adjustments. So you could be making $300,000, and for a family in a Midwest town where I'm from, like Tulsa, Oklahoma, you are pretty wealthy and probably have enough money left over after your living expenses, maybe to pay for, a $95,000 education. But $300,000 for a family in New York, very different cost of living.
All of this, Francesca says, leaves a lot of families in the financial middle feeling squeezed.
So the people that fall in the middle, that didn't get enough aid, but then can't afford to pay the full sticker price, those are the families that are really feeling like they need to either take on loans or squeeze their finances to really go into these colleges that they've dreamed about going their whole lives.
Conventional wisdom used to hold that for people on lower incomes, public universities were the best option, with much lower sticker prices for in-state students than their private rivals. Well, after the break, why that's not necessarily the case anymore, and why the data show it might be a better idea for people from more modest backgrounds to aim for private schools. Bloomberg's Paulina Cachero and Francesca Maglione looked at what it would cost students from families with a range of household incomes to attend some of the most selective schools in the country, both private schools and public universities.
From those two analyses, surprisingly, we found that public schools can actually end up being more expensive because they have less resources. A family making $75,000 ends up paying $23,000 for a public in-state public education, whereas a private school that has a lot of financial resources, they would pay just $8,000. So they'd pay 3 times more at a public school.
The ethos has been private school might be inherently unaffordable.
Right.
Go for the in-state school, but what you found kind of
it totally reverses that. But I mean, there's a little bit more nuance to the math. So once you start making $200,000, a public school actually does start to become cheaper because, public schools overall, their sticker price tuition tops out around $30,000, right? Whereas if you're looking at a prestigious private school, you could be close to paying $100,000. So for families that make $75,000 to $150,000, a public school will be more expensive. But, if you make $200,000 or more, the public school will be cheaper. So it's a really weird breaking point and kind of surprising.
Paulina and Francesca found a clear correlation between the size of a school's endowment and how generous that college or university is with its financial aid. If you're from a low-income family and you get into an Ivy, you get significantly more assistance. But Francesca says most applicants to Ivies, regardless of income, don't get in.
These students are left to decide between a handful of schools where picking what school might give you the best financial aid feels a little random, and students have no idea how these schools calculate their financial aid, how they land at these numbers. So it kind of feels like Russian roulette deciding what school might be more affordable down the line.
In real terms, what does it mean for families who are kind of convincing themselves of the worth of these institutions and trying to make that math work? I mean, we're talking about a pretty substantial percentage of income in a lot of cases that would be going toward paying for college or university.
We actually did a project last year looking at the return on investment of college degrees. We analyzed over 1,500 schools, and that took into account, the factors that a lot of families are thinking about today, which is, how much am I actually going to pay for that degree? How much debt will my child have to take on? What opportunities will be available to them given that brand name degree? And, what is their earning potential after? It's a really complicated calculus because it's not just about the cost. Because if you go to a small school that's cheaper, if it doesn't provide you the network that you need to get that job or to get a higher wage, then it doesn't matter.
Did reporting this story change your sense of that story?
Even 5-10 years ago, whenever a student would, get into that Harvard or into their dream school, I feel like often parents would say, no matter the cost, this brand name degree is going to be worth it. We'll take on whatever debt, we'll take on a Parent Plus loan, do whatever. This will help you achieve the American dream and to climb the social ladder. But I think these days, because people are questioning the value of a college degree, it's a little bit more difficult. Is the family willing to put themselves in a huge financial burden or their child in a huge financial burden for a college degree that they don't know will work out? New grads today are facing kind of a tepid labor market. And even if you come from a Harvard or a Yale, that doesn't necessarily mean that you'll get a job. That's just the reality of the white-collar labor market today. So I think the conversations are a little bit more difficult, and there's a little bit more of a reality check for many students. You have these students that work really hard and we're told that they are expected or should go to the best school that they possibly can. But when you get your financial aid package and realize what a financial burden that could be on your family, I don't know what I would have done at 17 at that time, but it's a difficult kind of moral dilemma for kids to be answering.
It was a dilemma that surprised Natarajan Viswanathan's son, Ayush, after he got into USC.
I mean, of course, I knew that college cost something, but, it never really registered that was a thing that I needed to consider when I was making a choice of college. I guess I sort of assumed that because students were able to go to these places, I would be able to go to these places.
Ayush's parents tried to find a way to make the numbers work, but the math was brutal. Just like back when Natarajan got into Stanford more than 30 years ago.
It was anyway going to be impossible for us to foot the bill. It hurt me quite a bit. It was very, very shocking for me to have to live through that moment again.
As a student, you spend so much time applying to these universities, writing those essays, getting letters of recommendation, doing all of these things. And then you put in all that effort, you get accepted, you tour the campus, you really enjoy it. You're walking around envisioning yourself as a student. And then, that sort of ideal being stopped by something that's more or less out of your control is, it stings quite a bit. But the decision was a little easier for me because I already had another great option, UCLA, which was in the same area.
Ayush is now studying neuroscience. Like his older brother, he wants to become a doctor. In the meantime, to keep expenses low, Ayush lives in a triple, a dorm room he shares with 2 other students. He chose the school's most affordable meal plan. His dad says that all in, Ayush's college costs are around $30,000 a year. That's a third of what USC would have cost.
The sticker shock at seeing like the price of certain schools can be quite daunting. But if I were to speak to, say a student who is considering to apply to these sort of elite schools, even a middle class student who may not get that much aid, that still might be very expensive for them, I wouldn't say to discount applying to, an elite university or these kinds of places. I'm just saying to consider the financial aspect of things, and when you're signing on the dotted line, getting all of your facts straight. And I think if you do that, you're more than welcome to apply to these schools.
This is The Big Take from Bloomberg News. I'm David Gura. This episode was produced by David Fox and Rachel Lewis-Krisky. It was edited by Patty Hirsch and Craig Giamona. It was fact-checked by Adriana Tapia and mixed and sound designed by Julian Weller. Special thanks to Ann Choi. Our senior producer is Naomi Shavin. Our senior editor is Elizabeth Ponso. Our deputy executive producer is Julia Weaver. Our executive producer is Nicole Beamsterboer. Sage Bauman is Bloomberg's head of podcasts. If you like this episode, make sure to subscribe and review The Big Take wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps people find the show. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow.